Former neo-Nazis, members of hate groups, what was your "I need to get the hell out of here" moment? I started to get older and learn more compassion. I was a lonely kid and I didn't have many friends. And I already grew up in a racist household and many of my family members are neo-Nazis, covered with white supremacy tattoos. I discovered a group of older skinhead kids and I fell into it pretty bad. As I was learning more compassion and slowly was shedding my neo-Nazi beliefs, my buddies were bragging that they beat the out of another mutual friend of ours when he said he wasn't a Nazi anymore and he was dating a black chick. I was already thinking about leaving the group. It was basically a little gang. Once I found out they were beating up people for leaving, I realized it really was like a gang and I didn't want anything to do with it. I was shedding my racism and I didn't want to be involved. So I thought if I was a piece of shit enough to be a Nazi in the first place, I deserved to get beat up anyway, and if getting beat up meant I could get away for a life away from Nazism, then that was good enough for me. I've still been a neo-Nazi for longer than I've been an anti-Nazi, but I'm looking forward to the day I can say I've been an anti-Nazi for longer than I've been one. Not me, but my grandfather evidently was a member of either the Klan or associated hate group back in the 1960s. He became a born-again Christian and walked away from it. There was little evidence of his history as I grew up. I only found out after my mother told me about it after he passed away. My uncle was part of the KKK. He was very poor and homeless, and the KKK supplies you with housing and food and pays for things for you. But he tried quitting, and one day as he left a bar, he was jumped by members and had his chest slit open. He had to get around 200 staples, but he still quit, thankfully. Wasn't actually a member, but when I saw that someone I used to be friends with trying to indoctrinate, I got curious and asked for evidence, sources, etc. A lot of the sources for stuff like race equals predisposed behavior and Holocaust denial are usually either related to statistics that are really easy to be faked. I got the out of there, but the psychology of how people get sucked into that type of stuff fascinates me. I was raised by white supremacists who were active in the movement in Canada. It occurred when I was 15, when I pretty much stopped just accepting that my parents were right on everything, and talking to my grandfather at the right time of my life, telling me how he ended up in Canada because his brother outed him as a communist and he had to run. I remember how in the hell does a communist raise a fascist? He said he could only give his children his morals and what he thought as right and wrong, but once they were adults, they were responsible for figuring the rest out, and that just as my mother rejected what he tried to impart on her, I could do the same. I have an acquaintance who works to help reform Nazis in Germany. According to her, a lot of people leave the movement not because they've had a change of heart, but because their lives have been threatened by their fellow Nazi friends. And since a lot of them have alienated their families and have no one to turn to for support or community, they will often end up in these formal, government-sponsored reform programs. She said that even though a drastic political shift might not be the catalyst for a person to join the program works with individuals over long stretches of time and with the aim of slowly shifting their views through mandated therapy. I should clarify, my understanding was that it was only mandated if they wished to continue with the program and receive their services. No one is required to participate in the program. It's voluntary and such. She said she's definitely seen some success stories, but has also seen some people who never quite have that change of heart. Going to prison, I ended up looking up to, even admiring a certain group of Mexican Americans in California prison. I did some bad stuff, and ended up getting locked up for it. Long story short, probably 70% of white dudes in prison are on meth. I just don't agree with that stuff. Drug use in general is a no-no in my book. The northern Mexicans had a policy of no drug use. Toughest workout regimens. Extreme discipline. Extreme respect. Must learn a few different languages. Conduct yourself with a high level of respect even when dealing with rivals. I couldn't help but wish the white dudes conducted themselves like they did. I had a northern Mexican neighbor in prison. He would always address me as sir even though I was technically his enemy. He would pass me food, tobacco. We would talk through the vent. It was funny sometimes. A new guard who just started working at the prison would walk past my northern Mexican neighbor's cell and expect to see a black dude or maybe a Russian, depended on what language he was speaking. I would love watching their faces when they realized it was a Mexican-American speaking African Swahili, or Russian. Their leaders made them learn a few languages so guards couldn't understand what they were saying ever. You come to realize in prison we're all in the same boat. It's eye-opening when someone who you think hates you treats you like one of their own. There were times where riots would break out on the yard between us and the Northerners, which can be nerve-wracking because they have a rule that they are not allowed to stop stabbing you until the guards break it up, which can take forever. And even then, my Northerner neighbor would send me food and other things, and never stopped addressing me as sir. Most of them were like that. My niece in Romania married a neo-Nazi last year, or at least we thought he was because of his long Facebook history, racist tattoos, prior arrest for hooliganism, etc. I had a 4-hour car ride with him and had a long chat. He quit because he left the Romania for a little while to work in Amsterdam. His co-workers were from all over the world, including African countries and Israel. He realized everyone was pretty much the same after drinking with them and smoking a joint after work. There was nothing about them worth hating. They were doing the same thing he was. He basically quit Facebook and started getting his tats modified, and hasn't touched politics at all since 3 or 4 years. Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime. My grandma says the reason her father, my great-grandpa, the nicest man I'd ever met in my life, left the KKK in Oklahoma was because a few of the older male members were starting to get handsy with the young daughters of the other members. These kids were under 10 years old and a couple men were caught with hands-up dresses. According to Grandma, he told the group he'd rather be surrounded by a bunch of an ***s than spend one more minute among the company of child perverts. Apparently even racists have a line in the sand. We still have the letter from they sent him in 1924 summoning him back to answer questions. Long ago, buddy of mine quit the Klan after just barely not getting his head taken off by a .44 mag. He and his fellas were in their trucks driving along, and saw a truck driving through what they thought of as the town. Said truck had a black guy driving, and another in the passenger seat. Being the kind of fellas they were, they took exception to this and gave chase, hooting, hollering, threatening to run the truck off the road, etc., as my friend was leaning out his window to yell some nonsense. The passenger in the truck they were chasing opted to instill a sense of caution in the good old boys via a Ruger. My friend saw the pistol come out, had that moment of dread, saw the muzzle drop ever so slightly, and the side mirror on his truck vanished. He realized how close he'd come to death for what suddenly seemed like a very silly reason. Within a few months he was quietly packing up and leaving town, cutting pretty much all his social ties permanently. But did he learn to accept and not hate? 'Cause quitting the Klan after a near-death doesn't exactly mean he's not racist anymore. Sorry if this came off aggressive. This is long, but I'm putting it out there. This was 30 years ago. I've probably only told this story 3 times in those years. It wasn't organized into anything identifiable as a group. It was more a large number of like-minded individuals living in the same North Alabama area. We all hated blacks. Weekend nights were spent at a few local bars surrounded by people talking about how some men had done something stupid or how they'd not let someone merge in traffic just because they were black. Edited that for clarity. You get wrapped up in that echo chamber. It's all you hear. The little things that happen between races start to seem like major trends. I went from being a guy who went to one of those bars as a joke, to making friends with people there, to having them, and that attitude become part of my life. I lived that life. I was that guy. You want to fit in, so you find your own stories to share. You start subconsciously seeking out anything that supports the racial stereotypes that fit the narrative of the group. You find huge fault with the minor things that make us different. Those people accepted me. They were my support group, my pseudo-family. Almost my entire social circle was made of people who hated every other race. We had some amazing times together, huge loving Christmas gatherings, vacations, Hunting trips. It's not like everything we did was centered around racism. It was just an underlying theme that would come out every now and then. I celebrated at weddings, cried at funerals, and danced when babies were born. I was in church with these people on Sundays. I helped build 2 Habitat for Humanity houses with people from that group, and we even raised money to help a local black family that had lost everything in a house fire. I think every group, everywhere, has a unifying thing that ties them together. This large group of people just happened to feel superior to black people. They didn't actively go out and do violent, evil things. They didn't all fly Confederate flags and spew hate. Most of them worked peacefully with black folks. Most of them were willing to help out black folks who had met with something bad. They just all felt that their skin color inherently made them superior. Then there was one night that changed everything for me. There were a couple of dozen people hanging out around a bonfire behind a bar, and I was listening to this guy the first really didn't like go on a drunken rant about how white people and black people were different. He'd scream they all sell drugs. And I'd think, well, so do you, dumbass. They are all on welfare. He was living on disability scam checks. They are all a bunch of thieves. Coming from someone who have been to jail several times for stealing materials from construction sites, I quite literally sat on a log around that fire and had a moment of enlightenment. His rant was almost like a voiceover where everything he said, or everything someone jokingly added, immediately made me look at who in that group was guilty of exactly what they were shading someone else with. I looked at these friends, these people I'd shared 100 meals and 1,000 beers with, and saw them all completely differently. There was nobody there I actually wanted to be around anymore. 10 minutes earlier I'd seen them as practically family. I can't really describe it. It was like they all changed, physically changed. The longer I looked at them, the more they morphed. They were no longer those good old heart of the country people I'd loved. They were all ignorant. Their entire body of knowledge was little more than passed down excuses and cliches. None of them were actually contributing anything to society. They weren't making the world a better place. They were doing nothing except figuring out how to keep someone under them so they didn't have to be the bottom of society. They were exactly what they said every other race was. I was physically sick when the girl I'd been dating came over. I looked at her, and instead of the cute chubby little country girl I'd shown up with, she was just the spawn of generations of stupidity. She was as sweet as she could be. She treated me like her hero, and her family loved me. All I could see when I looked at her was every throwaway bigoted comment she'd ever made, every time she'd rolled her eyes at a black cashier, every snarky comment at the Chinese buffet. She had never done a thing wrong to me, and I've never felt a need to get away from someone so fast in my life. It was like I knew she was an anchor, and if I stayed with her I'd forever be one of these people. I'll never have the words to explain what those people looked like when I was leaving. They had all changed. I left that night and never looked back. I talked to the girl one time because she tracked me down at work, and I promised I was okay. My head was just all messed up, and I needed a little time alone. I called my mom, told her I needed to move home 90 miles away, and by Friday I had ghosted that entire place and everyone in it. God save my inbox. I appreciate all the love. I'll try to answer any questions that anyone asks, but I never thought a story from my past was going to blow up like this. Y'all can stop with the gold. 2. I appreciate it, but y'all can use that money for better things than imaginary internet bling. Especially on my throwaway account. Y'all go find some person who is a different race than you and just buy them lunch or something. Love y'all. Thanks for the love back. Just discovered that gold is only $1.99. Y'all can buy them something at the vending machine. I met a gay man, a real, live man infected with the gay. I was raised in a very homophobic home in a rural area, and I always believed gays were bad people. I thought they were rude, self-centered, and bullies. I distanced myself from them until one day I was assigned to work with a flamboyantly gay man. I was horrified. He proved to be one of the nicest, most caring people I had ever met. He was a fantastic listener and good with melding ideas together. That interaction completely changes my outlook on LGBTQ+ people. Much to the horror of my conservative family, they are quite uncomfortable that one of my best friends is a pansexual that uses they/them pronouns. I don't know why I didn't think people were decent humans just because of who they are attracted to, but opening my eyes allowed me to meet so many amazing people. My dad was a KKK member and I became a neo-Nazi skinhead at the age of 14, because it was acceptable rebellion, i.e., I could be a teenager but not risk getting kicked or upsetting my parents too bad. At 18, I married a former Klansman who also had ties to a neo-Nazi group I was in. We bounced between various groups for about a decade after the main neo-Nazi group split, including a year or two where we were both on the state board of the local KKK. There were times I thought about leaving and was having second thoughts, in part because of hypocrisy and how most racists we knew lived and behaved worse than they stereotyped other races as doing, and in part because of growing misogyny in the larger racist movement, but I was worried about losing all my friends and my family if I did. Being an open racist isn't really constructive to making or keeping friends who are not also racist. The final straw was twofold. I was pregnant and didn't want to raise my son that way because overall it made our lives worse. Plus I connected with a few people in online pregnancy groups without knowing their race and found that one woman I related to the most was black and married to a white man. My husband had also come out as bisexual and, during my pregnancy, had told me he was possibly transgender. He had dating profiles online stating this, and I was worried some of our friends would literally kill him if they found out.